Okay, good afternoon. This is RJ with the IWS podcast, and I'm happy to have here this afternoon Mr. Darryon Spencer, another licensed therapist. Good afternoon, brother. How are you?
I'm doing well. I was just reflecting earlier before you came in. Saturday is a day I usually would see clients. So
Mm.
it's nice. It's been a couple months I haven't seen clients today, so it's been nice just to reflect and take in the Saturday. So I'm doing well, man. How about
Yeah,
you?
man. Excellent, man. Yeah, I can't complain. And I agree. I know we kind of chatted about that once before. I'm a big
Yeah.
believer in boundaries, as I'm sure
Yeah.
we might end up talking about. We can't be on all the time because at some point to me, we're going to sacrifice ourselves. And I just don't feel like that's healthy either for us or for our clients. So,
Definitely not for the clients, and that shows. That's a conversation I have with a lot of other therapists.
yeah, man. We're trying to avoid burnout as much as possible.
Oh man.
No doubt.
That word is like it's coming after us. We're trying to avoid it, but it's coming after us.
Yeah. So self care is a
Hmm.
must.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah,
that's
man.
that's something I learned from you,
Okay.
reminded of from you.
Excellent. I'm
Yeah.
I'm always trying to provide some help and some benefit there, and
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in that. So I'm
Yeah.
sure we'll touch on that again, and definitely, I think even for anybody who listens or watches this, this isn't geared for just medical or licensed professionals. Also, just people who work in their respective fields,
Hmm.
taking that time to check in on yourself, to work on yourself, making sure you're okay, because in whatever profession you do or whatever roles you have, it's important to make sure like we can give our best, but we first got to make sure like we're taking care of ourselves so that we
Yeah,
can be able to offer that insight or service to whoever it is that we are working with. And so I'm always a big believer in that. Got to have some good boundaries to protect that.
for sure.
But starting with you,
Yeah.
we have our questions here. I want to begin because this is a an opportunity for us to obviously learn from each other as well. How we got into the field, what
Hmm.
caused us to want to be interested in providing that service and help to others. But I want to
Yeah.
start by talking a little bit about, how you grew up and how would you describe sort of your family dynamics in your earlier years?
Yeah. So it's interesting because, like I mentioned, I've watched some of your podcasts already, and it's interesting to hear other people's family dynamics, and it's something like I find that I compare a lot with my black male friends, because
Yeah.
everyone's situation is so different. And comparing has made me say like, man, I might have been really, really privileged. And I always lately I've been growing closer with my dad, and I always reach out and I just thank him for like being there, not
Yeah.
just physically, but emotionally,
Yes, sir.
and in all other ways. So to answer your question, like I grew up in a household with both biological mom and biological dad, and it how do I even break it down? It was kind of the typical stereotype. Dad was the disciplinarian
Sure.
and mom was the nurturer. And
Yeah.
of course, like there were moments where I was mama's boy and there was moments where I was daddy's son.
Yeah.
And that's how I was raised when it comes to the generic look at the dynamic.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's fair. I mean, no, and I like that you brought up, even when I talked to on my other episode,
Yeah.
and I told that brother that I was talking to as well. It's interesting because we all have different ways and how we end up coming into the profession. And
Hmm.
I don't ever want to assume that like everybody had these horrific traumatic experiences that cause them to want to help. Now,
Right.
I'm a big believer in that most people that usually go into a helping profession usually have had a certain level of challenge and adversity they've had to overcome,
Oh, for sure.
right? That
For sure.
that they want to turn around, look forward, and say, hey, like, how can I provide some assistance to the next group? Um, but family dynamics,
Yeah.
I always talk about it because to me, it's what shapes our reality. It's what shapes our perception of
Hmm.
how we deal with others, how we see
Hmm.
ourselves, how we deal with our environment, as we're coming up.
Yeah.
And I always talk a lot about, just from my experience and a lot of the men that I've been fortunate to work with, that a lot of us have had, particularly when you talk about like mother father dynamic,
Hmm.
for those of us that have fathers in the home, there's not always that accessibility of emotional conversation and vulnerability. A lot of times
Yeah.
in my experience has been they're present, They will try to be there for you. They might try to support you, but there's such a level of discomfort in engaging in that type of conversation and those types of discussions that
Yeah.
it's virtually non-existent. So then we end up kind of having those conversations with mom, which is fine, but
Right.
that can hinder our growth and in development in terms of being comfortable to speak with other men
For
because we
sure.
never had that level of comfort with our dad or
Yeah.
whoever that maybe male fatherly figure was in our home. And so
Mhm.
it makes it very difficult to learn how to formulate relationships with other guys. And it can spill over as well into romantic relationships for those of us that are heterosexual with
Mhm.
women, because if we don't see our mothers and our fathers interact in such a manner, and like I would say maybe a healthy manner, that we don't know how to then replicate it because we didn't experience it or witness it. So it's kind of hard to to do what you've never seen.
Yeah. Man, that's so, that makes me think about my interactions like growing up, like throughout the years from childhood to preteen to teen to young adult, and my
Yeah.
interactions with other boys or men at my age, and the I'm thinking about the interaction now, man, because I always entered those spaces just open to having those emotionally deep conversations.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a lot of my peers were like, "Yo, what? No, we're not doing it. What are we talking about now?" You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, it would be like it could be something that they might laugh off, like, "Oh, you're soft," or "Oh, what are you, gay?" or whatever
Yeah.
it may be. And I never really thought to think of, okay, what was their family dynamic like compared to
Hmm.
mine.
Yes,
So
sir.
that's really interesting. That's an interesting point.
Oh yeah. I had I have a young brother that I'm working with, actually two, right around the
Mhm.
same age, 16 and 17. And yeah, precisely what you just said is what they told me. And I remember hearing that when I was growing up too. If you
Wow.
wanted to be vulnerable, if you wanted to open up a little bit, yeah, it's not uncommon to maybe be called gay
Hmm.
or to be called being like too feminine or acting like girly,
Sure.
because again, it's almost like that level of machismo that we have to be like, nah, man,
Hmm.
we don't talk about that stuff. We bury everything inside like real,
Yep.
like real G's do.
Ah,
And it's like,
man.
nah, man. I mean, you get older, right? And you're like, I don't think that's the best way, though. I don't know if that's really serving us well. That might actually
It's
be hindering us in our future. But at that time, obviously, as you said, depending on what you are observing in your home,
Mhm.
that's normalized to you.
Yep.
And it's hard to fight what's normalized to you until you become of age and you get to maybe a point where you're willing to challenge your perspective and your thinking.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you know as well as I do, that might take a while.
Takes some time. It's interesting, and not to steer the conversation any kind of way. The one thing, going back to my dad, and I thank him all the time, the one
Mm,
thing I learned from him is the time it takes, because his upbringing was similar yet different to mine, and I saw him
yeah,
have to let go of that machismo as he's gotten older.
yeah,
I've got to see him, and as he's getting older, his like space to have these emotional conversations and these vulnerable conversations is growing. Like, and that's what I love working
yeah.
with black men. Like, you're never too young or too old. I always see like growth
Mm-mm.
in that space. So
Correct. No, I
yeah.
agree, man. I'm always a big believer in if the willingness is there,
Yeah.
we can work on that. We can grow in that area. The hard part is, and again, I know who I'm talking to. The hard
Hmm.
part is you got to be willing to recognize that very early on. Like if I have to try to convince you that maybe your way of thinking or maybe your way of seeing things is not the only way that it could be perceived, like we're gonna have a very difficult time trying to work together because you might be not as open to that type of perspective or
Right.
again just challenging one's thought. Could I be wrong? Is
Hmm.
my implicit and personal bias so strong that I can't I can't look past it right now? And so I'm a big believer in, if you have somebody who's willing to try to more objectively look at their scenario
Hmm.
and take feedback, there's a great opportunity for growth no matter how old you are. Because I've had clients, in their 70s before,
Hmm.
like even early on in my practice. So I'm not one of those like, oh, you're too old. Like I don't believe that. I never believe that. It's just, do they really want to make those changes? And if so, we can do good work together.
Yep. I agree.
So, but yes, but the family dynamic, as you said, is extremely vital.
Man,
And
so
I will
important.
say to you, it sounds like you have had and built a better relationship with your father, and you're saying he's grown over time,
Oh,
even in his
absolutely.
experience, which
Yeah.
then can reaffirm to you, like, yeah, this is a better way of being. Because not only
Mhm.
is it healthier in terms of us communicating with each other, perhaps it also gives me an opportunity to learn and mimic that type of
Mhm.
behavior again, maybe with other men, maybe
Mhm.
with my clients, because I can, we do a lot of, I imagine you might do a bit of role play
Yeah.
with your clients to show them, healthier ways to maybe communicate or to share some insight. And I think it's helpful when you have those real life experiences to draw from,
So
right?
helpful.
So
Yeah.
it's great that that your father is choosing to do that, and that you guys can build your
Man.
relationship together. So, and speaking
Unfortunate,
of,
man.
oh, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just saying unfortunate.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, hey, listen, we support that. We want that. We love for that to be the norm.
Hmm.
We would love for that to be the norm. Um, and building on that topic, and based on your experience growing up, what factors or influences would you say help to motivate or inspire you to even want to go down a path in mental health counseling?
There's so many layers to the answer. So going back to what you mentioned earlier about everyone has their journey to becoming whatever you become in life.
Hmm.
In our field, it's always like going through something, like overcoming something, and I think you even mentioned helping, right? So I always knew ever since I was a little boy, I wanted to be in the helping profession,
Okay.
right? I didn't really I didn't really have the opportunity to think for myself because my parents are from Jamaica. I was born
Okay.
in Jamaica as well. So
Okay.
coming from parents who are migrants who migrated to America, I think many cultures could identify with what I'm about to say. They steer you down the direction of doctor. If they're a little more open minded, maybe doctor or lawyer. If they're
Sure.
a little more open minded, we expand the list.
Right.
But for
Right.
me, it was doctor. Like, don't even think about it, buddy. Become a
Yeah.
doctor.
Right.
Um, my dad had this interesting phrase he used to say all the time, and I'm starting to decode it and understand where he was coming from.
Hmm.
He used to always say, "Son, become a doctor first, and then you could be whoever you want to be after. You could be a firefighter, a police officer, an astronaut, but become a doctor first." As a kid, it was like a black and white statement,
Sure.
but now I understand the nuance to it. And I
Okay.
respect where he was coming from. I don't know if I'd give the same advice, but I
Respect.
respect where he was coming from now being an adult and understanding like just the financial world
Yeah.
and how if you are struggling in that domain of your life, oh, everything else is a sinking ship.
Yeah, man. I mean, I can definitely resonate with what you mean. Definitely some context here. A lot of us, I think, who come from those backgrounds, and obviously it's becoming more common, which is great, that we
Mhm.
have people who are coming from different walks of life come to America, trying to build a better future for their children, and then we come here.
Yeah,
That the expectations, I think, in a lot of cases are very traditional. And
right.
as you said, I respect that, because it's
Yeah.
usually the ones that we think of maybe in terms of stability, safety, being
Mhm.
able to provide things like that. And I definitely heard similar professions thrown at me as well.
Right.
And I think because it's hard to imagine, depending on where you came from, it's hard to imagine some of these professions and careers that folks go into. Like, again, it's hard to imagine what you don't know. So you say, like, oh, I
Exactly.
do this. Like, for example, like nowadays, somebody would say, like, oh, I'm an influencer. 20 years ago, you're like, what? Like, what
Yep.
is that? I don't even know what that means. Like, do you go to school for that? How do you
Exactly.
provide for yourself?
Yep.
Can you provide for yourself?
Mhm.
And now it's like, no, we understand that. And so I think, and then, not that people don't know what therapists are, but I would say, particularly for our communities, not as well known, and definitely
Yeah.
not as pushed or motivated or encouraged for us to go into those type of fields, particularly not guys. Maybe
Right.
women, sure, but men, absolutely not. And
Hmm.
so I do think that there's that cultural context and that cultural aspect where, your parents or whoever's raising you, they typically want the best for you. So they're going to encourage you to go down roads that they feel are going to ensure greater success for your life, particularly when they're no longer here.
Yep.
But I think we have to learn, as you said, to start to like expand our horizons a little bit more, because
Mhm.
there is more that we can offer. But we have to slowly become more exposed, right?
Right.
So I'm hoping that that's the benefit of sometimes having maybe these types of conversations,
Yeah.
because somebody might
Yeah.
listen to this and be like, oh, there was two brothers on this podcast who were talking about mental health and how their families didn't encourage them to do it either, and
Yes.
I want to do something quote unquote non-traditional,
Yeah.
and they encouraged me. And to me, that's a huge benefit of what, we can impact others, and being able to see that we
Mhm.
do this.
Man, that is so profound because now I'm at the point where I'm having the conversation with my dad where I'm like, "Hey, I respect, I understand, and I appreciate that message you were sending to me. But here's my perspective as well, you know.
Hmm.
And just as you said, we have to come from a limited understanding and expand that.
Yes, sir.
And I'm proud of him, man. He's doing that. He's doing that himself. And I was lucky enough to when I went down this route, they were fully supportive. They may have said like
Good.
little comments that were based in fear
Sure,
and
sure.
worry, but they were pretty supportive. But to get back to the root of your question, like how I got here, I always knew I wanted to be in the helping profession. My
Hmm.
parents always said, mostly my dad was always saying, become a doctor. So by the time I was a teenager, I was dead set on that. I they were on top of me about my academics, so I got down that path. I went to college by like year two in undergrad, going down the path of becoming a doctor, but I'm still in the prerequisite courses.
Yeah.
I started to realize I took a course that outlined the trajectory of becoming a doctor.
Okay.
I was like, whew, this is not for me. This is not for me. Interestingly enough, at the same time, I was taking another prerequisite, which was Psych 101. I
Okay.
had to take a psychology course. And I'd taken one in high school and I didn't think anything of it. Like, okay, I'm taking a class.
Right.
This time, when I was taking it, I was like, whoa, this is something I'm passionate about, like learning.
Hmm.
If it wasn't a class, I would still read a book up on it. I'm learning a lot about self. And
Yeah.
to me, that was vital because college was a time where I was a little bit lost when it came to self, like understanding myself.
Yeah.
Mindfulness was out the window, like, and I was dealing with so much. I went to college at 17. My second year, I was 18, 19.
Yeah.
So I was still like a baby in this world I entered on my own, moving from my parents' house to a whole nother city by myself. Basically, it's like dealing with so much mental health stuff. And
Yeah.
I didn't have the mindfulness to be aware of like, oh, are we taking care of our mental health here?
Yeah.
Do we even realize what's going on? Do we understand that this over here is you experiencing anxiety? This over here is you experiencing maybe an episode of depression.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's like, do we even have the language for that? If
A
we
lot of times,
did,
no.
yeah. And if we did, have I worked out all this male egotistical machismo to acknowledge those things and say, okay, I need maybe some help or I need to do some work in these areas. So
Yeah.
when I got into that course and I started learning myself and the way the psyche works, paired with me always wanting to be in the helping profession, at the end of the second year, I was like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience, definitely with psychology. I feel like that general psychology, that first
Yeah.
one, kind of gets everybody like,
It grabs you.
I want to learn a little more. You've piqued
Yep.
my curiosity a little bit.
Yep.
So I definitely I had a similar experience with that type of course. And like you said, um, I guess one difference I would say for me, and this is why obviously I believe so much in your environment and what you experience early on in life, right?
Right.
So for me, to give context of how I got here, I I lost my mom when I was very young from
Right.
cancer, and so I've had experiences with therapists since I was a very young boy, and off and
Wow.
on. And of course, when I was younger, I didn't, I couldn't fully appreciate it because I didn't really understand what was happening. I just knew
Yeah.
that, this person's no longer here. But I always kind of noticed how, and again, these usually were women, but
Hmm.
how warm they were and considerate and compassionate and trying to check on me. And especially for me, the way I grew up, my father wasn't providing that. He was the disciplinarian, the structured person,
Hmm.
organize all of that kind of stuff, teaching you to be more independent, not so much about expressing or sharing. And
Right.
so having women like that around and therapists like that really helped me to learn to somewhat value that. Again, very young, so I couldn't fully appreciate it because I wasn't getting it enough. But I
Right.
just always remembered that that was things that they were trying to encourage me to do. And
Gotcha.
so that was like my first taste of that, if you will. And then as I got older, I recognized that I always liked listening to people. I like talking, but I always liked listening to people
Hmm.
when they would talk about things that they were kind of struggling on and just trying to support them. I didn't know how, but a lot of
Yeah.
times it was just trying to sitting and listening. And that always persisted. Like the older I got, the more I kept doing it. And of course, I forgot what that profession was called. I forgot the whole discipline. Like I had no reference point.
Right.
I just remember, hey, these people were there, and I've gone to them even as I got older when I was in college and undergrad. But it didn't click to me until I was like literally a year into finishing undergrad, and I didn't go psychology. I was like a criminal justice anthropology major.
Ah.
Yeah, so it's a little different, but it was always coming through the lens of caring about people and wanting to see them improve themselves, not just being overly
Mm.
punitive and overly critical and kind of like ostracize individuals from community. We need them. We
Mm.
need to help them to reintegrate back into society.
Right.
And so, thankfully, I had an advisor who helped challenge me and remind me at UCF that there was a program that they had that was highly ranked, and to go talk to somebody.
Mm.
And after I had a conversation there, that's really what kind of put me on that path because I was like, oh, I forgot that like these were things, like these were people that do this type of work. And then it hit me. And then talking to them, I was like, because I thought I was going to be a doctor long ago. I thought I was going to be a pharmacist. Well, right before that was being a lawyer, and I was very close.
Oh man.
But something like really resonated with me was like being with people in their times of need and when they're struggling and when they really need somebody to be in their corner. And that's really what helped encourage me because I in my mind I went back to when I was a kid, and those people were trying to be there for me when I really didn't know what was going on. And I was like, if I can offer some fraction of that to these people, I think that that would be a great use of my life or a great purpose that I can maybe fulfill for somebody. And I find that a lot of people might go down that road as well, where maybe they've had to again overcome some type of hardship,
Hmm.
and that's motivated them to say, if I can make it easier on you or give you some insight that maybe it's a little less challenging for you, then I'd love to be there and give you that. And
Hmm.
so, but regardless, everybody doesn't have to go through that. My point is, that's kind of how I got into the field. But
Yeah.
the fact that we're here is, to
Mhm.
me, there's so much opportunity in terms of how much we can impact others in
Man.
healthier ways, right? And then we draw on our experience, both lived and practical, that we've worked with clients
Yeah.
to allow them to grow and benefit from that experience.
Ooh. You said a lot of like buzzwords there that just resonate in my mind. One, impact. That's a strong word, and
Oh yeah.
it sounds like based on your story of how you got here, it's like, and I hear this a lot. I identify it within myself and other therapists. It's like we were molded to be this. You know,
Mm,
we were in tune with what we were passionate about, and we followed that.
yeah.
And you mentioned the word purpose, and I think that's just like what we're doing as therapists in this space. We're just following like the purpose.
Correct. I agree so much. And I mean, that's what's drawn me to do this, right? And to talk to
Yeah.
brothers like you,
Hmm.
because I feel like it's another way, it's another layer to create impact, to be available, to be present, to maybe for somebody who hasn't really ever challenged the way that they see things, or maybe they're going through stuff but they're not willing to, they haven't been willing to acknowledge it yet.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll listen to something like this or see something like this, and hopefully think within themselves, like, am I okay? Have I really dealt with some of the stuff that I've gone through? Should I perhaps go talk to somebody and maybe consider getting some help? Because I tend to avoid a lot of the
Mm.
problems that I've gone through in my life. I tend to suppress, I tend to compartmentalize. Maybe those aren't the best ways for me to maneuver challenge in my life, but you need to have the thought there to challenge what you're thinking, and then to order do something about it.
Exactly.
And I'm hoping that, having these type of conversations, to because they're more accessible for folks,
Yeah.
that they might be willing to listen to it and say, you know what, there might have been something there that they said, and maybe I should like look deeper, like look in the mirror and sort of self-reflect.
Hmm.
So that to me is like a benefit of doing this, but that piggybacks on the work that we already do, because that's what we try to do with our clients one-on-one, right?
Right.
So
Man, and it's gonna happen. It's going to happen because we sit and listen to podcasts, and it has such a huge impact on us.
right.
Um, Based on our conversations already, like I said, and I truly mean it. So I'll say it a million times. You have helped me look at self care and from a whole different lens, not just based on things you simply said, but based on your philosophies of life, like how you approach life and approach like setting boundaries,
Yes, sir.
not for others but for yourself.
Yes, have to. No, man, that's, to me, that's vital. Particularly, again, we were mentioning before we started the episode, talking about burnout.
Yeah.
We know that that's very real. We know that
Mm-hmm.
that's very challenging,
Mm-hmm.
and given the nature of what we do, right,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to turn off.
Mm.
I won't
Oh
speak for
yeah.
you, but I'll speak for a lot of the therapists that I do know.
Yeah.
It's hard to turn off and pretend like I always tell my clients this, right? I'll say, when I choose to work with somebody, and I emphasize choose, we choose each other. They choose to
Yeah.
work with me, I choose to work with them after we had the consultation.
Right.
I choose you because I genuinely want to be invested in you. It's not about money. It's important, don't get me wrong. I know the nature of our relationship,
Sure.
but I genuinely care about you, and I want to help you not only overcome the challenges that you're facing, but live the
Yeah.
best version of yourself, be the most genuine version of yourself.
Right.
But in order to do that, in order for me to be able to offer that level of emotional capacity that is limited to everybody, right? You only have so much every day that you can submit.
That's true.
You got to take good care of yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm never going to say that I don't think we should do that. Being the practitioners, being the providers, being the helpers, because we have a responsibility, in my opinion, to model that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you to do things that I don't do, because I feel like that's hypocritical.
Right.
I
It
don't think
is.
that that makes sense. Like, I usually give the example, like, I wouldn't take guidance or advice from a doctor or a nutritionist or a personal trainer who is out of shape and overweight, just because you clearly don't follow what you say. So why should I take you seriously? You don't have the level of discipline in your own life. And I'm
Mm.
not saying I have it all figured out, by no means,
Right.
but I try my best every
Right.
day to live the life that I try to help others, encourage them to get to as well, in their own unique ways. You got to do
Mm-hmm.
what I do. Just take good care of yourself, be
Mm-hmm.
physically active, try to work on your nutrition, make sure you get proper rest,
Right.
things like that. And then take time for yourself. Don't always be on,
Yep.
because you can't do it. It's an unsustainable model to just work, 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 work. And in America, in my experience, that is definitely what we perpetrate. We don't perpetrate self care. We perpetrate run yourself into the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you have a nervous breakdown, and then you take some time away, and then you start again, which, again, I would never recommend. It's not healthy. People don't always recover from it.
No.
So to me, it's much more important, especially when you talk about our community and the professions that we share,
Yeah.
for us to be around long enough to create the level of change that I think we both want to be able to do. And I'm sure other brothers and sisters out there like us would want to do. You got to
Absolutely.
be in the game.
Yeah.
If you burn yourself out because you're doing too many things or you
Mhm.
don't have that time away for yourself, how can you expect to be here to create long lasting impact, which I believe is the goal?
Absolutely.
So,
I believe it wholeheartedly, man. And one thing you're doing is you are modeling that. It's also there's a saying that goes, a smart man learns from their own mistakes, a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. And you can be a
yes.
smart and wise man. So
Yes.
you're modeling the appropriate approach. And unfortunately, I'll speak personally, I have witnessed many therapists model the inappropriate approach and the repercussions to that. Unfortunately, I've
Mhm.
met many therapists who their mental or physical health just took a hit because, and it's no one's fault. I don't think it's any personal individual's fault.
Okay.
I think it's like you said, it's an American thing where not individually but systemically
Yeah.
they encourage this work, 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 and you are successful for working past this whatever number, past 40 hours. You're
Yeah.
successful. You're a go-getter.
Yeah.
Look at you. Look at all these things you're attending and things you're achieving. And you slept 5 hours so you could wake up and achieve more. You go.
Oh yeah.
So it's like no individual is to blame, but we have to take care of ourselves. We have to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm never gonna jump off that bandwagon
Yeah.
because
I like
number
it.
one, again, regardless of industry, and I can take this in so many different ways. Like I'll actually I'll give one more before we continue,
Yeah.
because I talk a lot about roles in therapy, right? Like the different roles that we play in our lives. It can be as a son, daughter, mother, father, for those of us that are parents, boyfriend,
Hmm.
girlfriend, husband, wife, you
Hmm.
know, for our relationships.
Hmm.
And we have to try to balance those roles. So let's
Hmm.
say you are, let's say you're a husband, you're a
Hmm.
father, and you're a man,
Hmm.
right? So that's three roles.
A lot of roles.
Correct. And I have to find a way to balance that. So I have to do things that are for, if you ask me the order, not that you did, but just for the sake of the example,
Yeah.
I would say it starts with you, the individual, the man. How
Right.
am I? What am I doing for myself? How am I taking good care of myself?
Right.
Then I would say it goes to the relationship for those of us that are in a romantic relationship with your
Right.
partner. Then it's how am I behaving as a partner in this relationship,
Right.
especially if you have children. And for those
Mhm.
of us that have children, then you focus on your parent relationship with your child.
Mm.
But I believe it goes in that order because if I'm not well, the relationship can't be well. And then if the
Right.
relationship's not well, the family can't be well,
Hmm.
in that order. That's the level of the structure. And you need the entity to be strong. You need the foundation to be solid. So to me, it always boils back to self. And it's sort of reimagining to a certain degree what we mean when we say selfish, because selfish usually has a negative connotation, right? It's not that we're saying that you are so self-absorbed,
Right.
that you only think about how you feel and what's important to you. I don't support that. That's
Right.
great if you only want to be by yourself, meaning no relationship, no children.
Right.
No, what we're saying is I need to prioritize and care about myself enough first because I have to be my first number one priority.
Hmm.
I have to. Because if I don't
Agree.
do that, who is going to do it for me? Nobody's in my head and in my heart. Only me.
Hmm.
Only I can advocate for myself in the best way because I know how I'm feeling things in real time. So I got to
Yep.
learn how to reimagine, maybe if I struggle,
Hmm.
how to be able to do that in a healthy manner. And then that would
Mm.
trickle down in those other areas between me having a romantic relationship. And again, for
Right.
those of us that have children, how I manage that relationship with my child. or children.
Right.
So anyway, let me get off my soapbox. All right.
Nah, we got to hear that, man. It's important to hear.
All right. So continuing along this line of conversation,
Mhm.
and specifically since I have you here, I
Right.
want to know from your experience so far in the field,
Right.
what has it been like for you working as a black male therapist? Since we know that we are not as prevalent in our
Oh yeah.
field and in a field that's largely female dominated, how would you say or describe that experience so far?
It's a good question, man. I know we've had a previous conversation, and I love this stat just so it's a reminder for me, and it's a reminder to whoever I share it with that.
Mm,
And the stats ever changing. It's
sure.
probably changing by the day. This stat I'm saying today might be slightly inaccurate, but
Sure.
roughly 4% of therapists in America are black. Roughly, and I can't really give you the specific stat on black women versus black men,
Right.
but
It's
this
small.
is a field where women have the higher percentage,
Correct.
and the male percentage is probably smaller, and there's a great need for representation on all sides.
Yes, sir.
So being a part of maybe this 3, 2, or 1%, it's like the thing I value is that one, we are valued, but also the people in search of us are valued as well. Because I come from working in community agencies, and I do appreciate that they allow the clients that come in to say, hey, I would like to see a black male therapist. I know you've
Mhm.
heard it a million times,
Oh yeah.
and I've heard it a bunch of times as well. And I appreciate these organizations understanding that representation is important.
Yes.
Now, for me specifically, what I've seen is it's so interesting because I've come into the field. My first job out of grad school um, was so purposeful, man. Like, I left the city I was living in to work um, alongside of DJJ, the Department of Juvenile Justice, to specifically work with black and brown teenage boys
Mm-hmm.
who the state just didn't know what to do. They were like, based on their pattern of behavior, they may end up in jail
Mm-hmm.
or prison as an adult. So, what
Right.
can we do to potentially reduce that recidivism?
Right.
Let's get some black male therapists. And man, let me tell you, the program was literally called. There were two programs I worked in. One was called the Impact Program, and it
Okay.
literally was an impact. And one was called Redirection, and it was literally redirecting a lot of these youth.
Mm.
A lot of mindset work,
Yeah.
to call it back to what we were talking about, that machismo, maybe not having a male figure, a positive male figure to
Correct.
have vulnerable conversations with these kids. Like, oh man, they appreciated it and valued it so much. So I feel like we are needed. Black therapists in general, black women therapists are needed. So are black male
Mm-hmm.
therapists. Um, now more than ever. Now,
Oh yeah.
well, I can't say that. Let me not say that. But now that the talk of mental health is like planting a seed in everyone's mind,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important that they see like we're here, you know?
Oh yeah. No, I'm with you, man. I think
Yeah,
it's everything you said there. I think is extremely vital,
yeah.
and even the stat, right?
Hmm.
I mean, we can say this anecdotally from our experience. I'm sure both our experience in grad school, looking in those classrooms, seeing that there's probably few people like us in
Yeah.
there,
Hmm.
and also in the field. Like, full disclosure, when you reached out to me because you said there's not a lot of people like us
Nope.
when you were looking to connect with others. And I
Yeah.
agree.
Hmm.
I agree. I've had the very same experience, or even just black professionals in the field, we could say,
Yeah.
particularly men. And so that's a big believer to me, and why I say about representation. And it's good to see this because it helps you imagine what is possible.
Hmm.
I didn't. I didn't see. I never had a black male therapist ever.
Wow.
All my therapists were white women.
Wow.
And again, to be clear here, we're not shaming or dissuading or discouraging our
Not at
white
all.
brothers and sisters who want to do this work at all. We
Not at
encourage that,
all.
right?
Hmm.
But what we are saying, to your point, is representation matters, and there is certain levels of comfortability when you
Yup.
have people who can somewhat understand. Like, number one, as black people, for those of us that identify that way, we're not a
Hmm.
monolith.
Oh
and
no.
and we'll use you as a perfect example. Your family
Yeah,
comes from the islands, right? From
exactly.
Jamaica.
Yep.
Jamaicans are not the same as Haitians, or not the same as
Nope.
people who come from the motherland in the continent of Africa. So
Hmm.
we're not going to make it sound like we all have the same experience because we have similar backgrounds.
Exactly.
But there are attributes or aspects that sometimes are in common, and it
Hmm.
can help when you don't have to explain all of that to
Oh,
somebody, when they can sort of get it. He's like, yeah, brother, I feel like you can get me there.
you're
and
preaching.
and
Yeah.
we appreciate that.
Hmm.
I will say, for me, that's one of those things that I didn't fully appreciate, as we've talked offline before, about myself being in the field, because I didn't immediately see that
Mm.
coming out of school. It wasn't like I was like, people were telling me, oh man, they're gonna need you, brother. Like, make sure you stay in the field. We gonna definitely need you, because the need and the demand is there. It was never portrayed like that. I didn't feel
Wow.
any particular difference between myself and my white and non-white or black counterparts. We all
Wow.
sort of got groomed the same way, because of the institutions. Went to a PWI, predominantly white institution. You have that expectation, so it's not like I expected them to be like an HBCU or something. But
Right. Right.
I do think that that was another reason that called me to want to do this type of work, number one, and then put together this type of platform that we're talking on, because you got to see it. You got to know and listen to people like us that are in the field and say, hey, if y'all are out there and you're interested in doing this type of work and it might call to you, brother, sister, we need you.
Yeah.
We need you here, because there's
Hmm.
not enough of us to service the number of people who are in need. And I feel like our community is just starting to wake up,
Hmm.
to really, not that we haven't acknowledged that there was issues there, but that we're starting to be more willing to acknowledge them and actually
Yep.
do something about them.
Yep. Yep.
It's one thing to know it's there and then put it to
Yeah.
the side. It's another thing to acknowledge it and say, okay, what do I need to do about it? And I
Yeah.
feel like we're on the cusp of that reality becoming more prevalent, which is really great for people
Yes.
like me and you and others that
Hmm.
really want to help provide a lot of that help.
Hmm. Yeah, man. We're we're really on the cusp of that for real, because it's like I see it, and we know it's a part of the stage of change, right? First, you're not aware. Then it
Pre-contemplation.
takes, yeah, pre-contemplation. Then it comes a point where you are aware.
Yeah,
But
contemplation.
even then it takes time before you take a step.
Yes. It's
And
not
usually, and
not
I know
linear.
you, yeah, I know you've seen it. By the time people reach out for therapy, they've been struggling. They think they've been struggling for months, but it's been
Hmm.
years and years.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and deeper than that, it's been generations and generations.
That's when you really want to go deep, especially when you're talking about us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Especially
yeah,
when you talk about us, it's usually generations deep.
yeah.
And again, we're not, or at least me, I'm not overly criticizing us as a people, because we haven't had access to even value doing this type of work. Number one, and we've had to be subjected to so much.
Yeah.
It's hard to know where the hell do you start. When you're talking about hundreds of years of
Hmm.
just being mistreated, and laws being put in place that intentionally hold you down,
Yeah.
it's hard to know where to start. But I am genuinely encouraged and optimistic and hopeful, because of what I'm hearing now, because of what I'm seeing now, because of
Hmm.
acknowledging and seeing brothers like you out here,
Hmm.
that I think the wave is coming, where this is
Mm,
going to start to become much more normalized, and people in
mhm.
society are not shaming people for wanting to acknowledge that. There has been, a little pushback here and there. I would say, to give a quick example,
Yeah.
like with athletes, right? I don't know if you remember, like from the Olympics in the summer, you had like
Mhm.
Simone Biles, you had Naomi Osaka,
Oh,
you
yeah.
had those, beautiful sisters out there who were, they were acknowledging and saying, and you could see them, like I watched Naomi Osaka's interview. I watched her break down, asking the questions. She was like, "Can we stop? Like, I
Mhm.
can't deal with this right now." And some, there are still some people who are like, "You're an athlete, you should be fine. Like, shut up and dribble, shut up and
Shut
play
up and
tennis, shut
dribble.
up and whatever
Yeah.
profession or sport you're in." And but that's not the masses. I hear much more people, particularly post George Floyd, saying, "No, it's okay to acknowledge that hurt and that pain." And
Mhm.
we need to get the right providers and people who genuinely want to support and help in those ways. We need to get them out there, so that way these folks can start to heal these communities. And
Yeah.
that's why I think it's great for those of us that really want to do this type of work. Now is a great time. If anybody's out there questioning whether they should, if they really want to, please, we need you.
Yeah. And it is such fulfilling work. To kind of touch on some of the points you made, like, and to make it more personal, I myself have gone through therapy throughout my adult life, and I would be, depending on, I've done a lot of solution focused brief therapy.
Mm,
So depending on what I was going into it about, I never really, in the beginning, I never really took into consideration like if this person needs to be black or a black male or represent me. But I remember, and kudos to some of these organizations, I remember the first time I went to therapy in my adult life, it was through my grad school.
mm,
And they asked me like the demographic stuff. I wrote down that I'm male. They asked me where I was born. I wrote down Jamaica. They asked me, how I identify. I wrote down I'm a black cisgendered male. And they paired me up with like as close to what they feel like could represent me. They couldn't get
okay.
me a male, and that's fine. But they
Sure.
got me a black Jamaican woman. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And not only the representation, forget about that. What I hear
Mm,
a lot with the clients I serve, as well as how I felt in that moment, is
mm.
the comfortability piece.
Yes, sir.
Comfortability piece. It's like we are in this space when you're a client going to therapy. A big part of that is being comfortable enough to be vulnerable.
Yes, that's paramount.
And coming from the background I came from, initially working with youth that had legal charges and what was in the juvenile justice system,
Hmm.
you want me to be vulnerable to some like random person first of all? You want me to talk about potentially like crimes I may have done?
Might potentially
Or
incriminate myself.
yeah, and it's like, and you want me to do that to someone that I'm not sure if they're culturally competent? I'm not sure. Like even me, they could look at me like, I don't know this dude, he might be the same skin tone. I don't know like what he
Yeah,
knows, like you said.
yeah.
But it is important from that part, and it's important for people to know like this is a field that's out here, and it is like a purposeful and what's that word I just used, fulfilling in so
Oh yeah.
many ways field
Oh
to
yeah.
be in. um, so yeah, I know there's probably a lot of people out there whose parents have been drilling in their head what they should be. But
No
it's a
doubt.
moment to really think about it.
Absolutely, man. And I want to touch on something that you said, because it's interesting. I think we got drawn into, especially when you're talking about the youth. I listened to
Mm-hmm.
you, for a while now, talking about the youth. That was a big part for me as well. I since I was in high school, I used to volunteer with AmeriCorps,
Mm,
with a lot of the elementary students, particularly in my part of town back in Gainesville, and
mm-hmm.
working with a lot of the young kids who are struggling with like state tests, usually
Yeah,
particularly in reading, writing, and math from our
right.
community. And it kind of snowballed from there. I've done like a big product of the Boys and Girls Clubs. I've always been a huge fan of them. They kept me on a good path for a
Yeah.
long time. And then later doing Big Brothers Big Sisters when I moved to Orlando here. And I've always believed a lot in mentorship because I know that for a lot of young men, particularly, not that young women don't need that either, but for the
Mm-hmm.
young men, for my experience,
Yeah.
we need that type of role models to give us something to aspire to be like. Not that we want to be them, but there's
No.
attributes that we like about them that we're like, I see them doing that. I want to do that. It encourages me to think bigger than what I was imagining for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then to take it further, what you were just referencing, working with DJJ, right? So I told you, undergrad, I studied criminal justice. So that was a lot of the work that I was trying to study was recidivism rates
Oh,
with youth,
oh wow.
because I saw that, like I grew up in a lot of those environments where those kids came from. Like I was just
Mm-hmm.
fortunate, you could maybe say. I had an extremely strict father who kept me out of the street.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a lot of the peers and friends that I had growing up, like they didn't necessarily have that. And
Mm.
so a lot of them might have been those statistics that we read
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
And of course, that to me, that hurts
Yeah. It
for
does.
any black and brown person. I hate to see that because I think that, we can be so much more than what we're perpetrated or portrayed as.
Mm-hmm.
And, but, somebody has to help lead that intervention. So as you were saying, sometimes, the good thing I like when you have juveniles or when you have youth where there's an opportunity to sometimes interject. So they won't necessarily, from a court perspective, we're getting kind of legal now. From the court perspective, they won't necessarily immediately throw them into jail depending on what they did. They may offer an opportunity to do things like pretrial diversions
Mm-hmm.
or, outpatient therapy or other type of programmatic work that keeps them from being locked up, especially with grown men.
Yeah.
So number one, depending on what they did, and are they in and out? Like, are they doing this habitually? First time offenses usually, you first maybe second time, depending on what it was, they might give you an opportunity to do something else to try to keep you out, right? And that's where people like you come in. Like you talked about working with those individuals in their settings, maybe whether they're incarcerated presently or not.
Mm-hmm.
I did some work previously when I was in grad school working with some youth and some adults who are under 21. So they kind of in Seminole County, they kind of kept them in the same threshold as youth,
Right.
and they would give them the same opportunities. So they would. I mean, the only thing that I didn't really like was they wouldn't give them as many sessions. So they would give them maybe 5 to 6 sessions, but they would allow them to start doing some mental health work to start to identify why they're behaving the way they're behaving, or what is maybe some of the challenges of growing up in the environments they're growing up in.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been a big believer in that. It's helpful if you can get to them when they're young because they're more
Mm-hmm.
impressionable. There's a greater opportunity to create that long lasting change. We're not saying that if you're older, you can't change. We're definitely not saying that. But you get more rooted in what you think and how you feel the older that you are. Those beliefs become harder and harder to break,
That's a fact.
but not impossible. But when you're younger, you're a lot more impressionable. Let's say 11 to 17.
Mm-hmm.
There's greater opportunity to try to help curb the path that you're going down, particularly if it's getting you terrible results like getting locked up or committing crimes that you really have no business doing. So the point of me saying this is that I believe a lot in those of us, again, that are in this field, not only to be a model and an example of what could be for them, just another example, not that they all have to follow our path,
Right.
but also that to try to create some impact within them, because
Mm-hmm.
they very much, and from my experience, when I was researching it, a lot of them don't have male figures in their life that are positive. A lot of them, their parents may be locked up, particularly their dads, if they're
Right.
black or brown,
Right.
and they need that example from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can be a part of that. There's other people as well. We
Mm-hmm.
don't want to just be like, we all aspire to be rappers and athletes, because we're more than that. We're
Yeah.
much more than that. And you can have a quality of life that is great. depending on what path you want to pursue, but you don't have to go down the path of committing crimes. And so I'm a big believer in reaching back and trying to help out in whatever capacity that you can. So the work that you were talking about doing to me is so critical. Not that
Yeah,
we always can do
absolutely.
it, but when we get other brothers and sisters that come up maybe after, if they
Hmm.
feel so impassioned to do so, we need them doing that work as well.
Yeah, it's vital.
Yeah, man.
Very vital.
Oh yeah. So I'm going to go to my next question.
Yeah.
It just kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier within the community, working specifically within the Black community. But
Hmm.
this to me is it was more important to give context behind the question. Things changed for me a lot after George Floyd, where a lot more brothers and sisters started to reach out, specifically because they were really upset, they were really hurt, very troubled, as I was as well,
Yeah.
seeing that. And I noticed for me, from a like provider standpoint, it changed because a lot more people started reaching out for help
Wow.
because they just didn't really know what to do with the feelings that they were feeling. And
Yeah.
rage and hurt was a lot of what I was hearing in terms of like
Hmm.
why are you reaching out in like a consultation.
Hmm.
And that's what started to put me on the path to really pay attention to my communities. And when I say communities, I mean Black and Latino communities. Um,
Hmm.
because I saw that the need was growing because people were specifically, as you said earlier, looking for people like us.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, have you noticed any change in your experience so far since George Floyd, that summer of 2020? Have you noticed any change for people reaching out to you or just a heightened level of being sought out in general as a Black mental health therapist?
That's interesting you asked, man, because for one, I was still working alongside with DJJ, and those are the only demographic of clients I was working with at the time. So they were all court mandated, you know.
Gotcha.
So I didn't get to see and I could only imagine the import of black families that I see a lot still.
Yeah.
Black families really thinking about the young ones in the family,
Yeah.
saying like, "Hey, this this is definitely something that's going on." And after George Floyd, it was like a domino effect, just highlighting, and everyone that I was coming in contact with was enraged, like you said, and that was literally trauma for us all to witness,
Yes, sir.
and vicarious trauma for us to experience.
Hmm.
Um, and still, the way I look at it from then to now is like a seed was planted. The talk of mental health had had started in a major way a couple years before that, maybe a couple in our community specifically,
Hmm.
and it kind of became like a little trendy to talk about mental health.
Yeah.
Um, and then that was like a time where a lot of people started reaching out. I'm aware that was going on. And then now I feel like now that seed, if you really think about a seed that's planted, I think now it's really starting to sprout.
I
And
can
if
see
we
that.
look at like trees, for one, like a bamboo stalk, I think it takes like 5 years to
Like
pop
fully
out.
sprout. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hoping in 5, 10 years, like it'll kind of be something you mentioned, like a big talk where it's like, oh, you're not in therapy. Like there's a reason you should be in therapy. Like
Hmm.
as a black person, as anyone, we experience so much trauma, whether it's individually or vicariously. It'll kind of be something that is not looked at like a privilege or um, a luxury.
Hmm.
But not to get on a rant.
No, hey,
I,
listen. Hey, listen, we're here for that. We people
yeah,
need to hear from us.
yeah,
So please.
yeah. So to bring it back though, a common theme I was seeing at the time of George Floyd, his murder, um, was a lot of black mothers. I think that's what I'm seeing a lot of still to this day. A lot
Mm,
of black single mothers with a young boy, um, reaching out for a black male therapist.
mm-hmm,
And I hear, and that's one group I think of. I
mm-hmm.
also think of the group that have took the walk to explore therapy,
Yeah.
and now they're like, they might be young adults and now they're like, whoa, how am I going to get my parents like in on this, because they need it more than I do. um, and it's just kind of like becoming a family thing now. What I love to see, it's interesting, I've been seeing quite a bit of this. I've been seeing black mothers and wives coming. They might call me for a consultation,
Mm.
and they're trying to set it all up within the family structure. They're setting up therapy for themselves.
There you
They're trying
go.
to get a therapist for their husband, trying to get a therapist for their children, trying to get a couples therapist. I'm seeing a lot of that in the black community, and I love it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
They're reaching out for couples therapy. So there's this big shift going on. I wasn't able to see it directly when
Mm.
George Floyd was murdered because I was still working with the court mandated youth.
Sure.
A lot of them didn't come into it wanting
Right. Yeah.
therapy,
Court mandated meaning, I
meaning a
didn't necessarily
punishment,
want to be here.
basically. Yeah,
Yeah.
they looked at it like a punishment. But it's interesting. Their mothers and their families looked at it like, wow, we really appreciate this, because we know, like, not to get too therapist-y or into CBT, we know thoughts are linked to feelings and feelings are linked to behaviors.
There you
If
go.
we're
Hey.
pointing if we're pointing at their behaviors, we got to take a peek at, like, what are they feeling?
Mm-hmm.
Can they vocalize that? Are they aware
Mm-hmm.
of that? What are they thinking? Can they really dig deep into that? So a lot of shifts since all of these murders and all of this death. A lot of shifts since then. A lot of trauma being felt
Oh
amongst the
yeah.
community.
Oh yeah. And need I say, um, nothing but as a father, nothing
Hmm.
but condolences to those families in Texas right now, and the
Oh
families in
man,
Buffalo, and the families in California. Um, that's always a hard one for me too. Not just
man,
being a parent, just imagining how that must feel. I mean, I
hmm,
am a father, so and
yeah.
my son just finished fifth grade.
Congrats, that's a big
Like,
milestone.
yeah, but I could imagine, because that was an elementary school
Hmm.
in Texas, so I could imagine, or I could not fully imagine, but I could have an idea of what it must feel like, to take your kid to school like on a normal day, and then to know that that was an outcome uniquely American, we might add.
Yeah.
So it's one of those situations where, to me, the need is always ever present, as you were
Hmm.
pointing out. Like, there's so many
Yeah.
reasons why you can tell it needs to be there, and we need to have access in different ways. But my hope is that, like you were mentioning, particularly when it comes to tragic events like with Mr. Floyd,
Hmm.
that there's those opportunities to not to do like a reframe, but there can be a silver lining. And as you pointed out, I feel like more people reaching out, which was my lived experience, made
Hmm.
me feel even more hopeful. It's
Hmm.
extremely unfortunate that it took something as horrific and tragic as that
Right.
to get us to recognize it.
Hmm.
But it made me feel a little more hopeful that, even though that did happen, there was more of us that recognized that we really needed to start doing some real deep work within. And as you said, I had very similar experience where the mom might have reached out, or the dad might have reached
Hmm.
out, or husband or wife, and then it spawns into other people. Then it becomes my kid, then it becomes couples therapy, then it becomes family therapy, because we recognize that there's some imbalances here, and we really want some insight and perspective. And for me, that of course feels great, because I would love to be any part of helping to heal any family. Um,
Yeah.
because there's a lot, that we got going on right now. But to me, again, it points back to the need of us to be here,
Yeah.
and for the need of us who are not sure, that this is a career path that they can follow if they have the heart for it and they really care.
Mhm.
There's absolutely the need there, and we can use you in so many ways, man. And
Yeah,
there's never going to be enough of us, because there's always going to be things that go on that require, or people could benefit from having a therapist like us. So
I agree.
anyways, moving on. um Still on the same line of thoughts,
Yeah.
when you think about the communities that we work with and that you work with,
Hmm.
do you notice or identify any particular issues that seem to be very common or maybe most prevalent in your clinical practice?
I'm thinking, um, for parents, for whether they come in seeking services for their children or for themselves and they're just parents,
Hmm.
a lot of anger, a lot of rage, not because of their children, just because of like the cards they've been dealt as
Yeah.
black or a part of the BIPOC community. Um, with with I'm really trying to think across the spectrum.
Hmm.
Um, with black teenage boys, I think they're just trying to like navigate this thing called life, you know. And man, the role models out there are scarce. Positive role models, let me say that.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's interesting to see their evolution.
Yeah.
Um, so for them, I think it's a lot of mindset work. Black young boys, a lot of
Oh yeah.
mindset work. Just understanding self versus like their ideal of what themselves should be.
Yeah. That's big.
Um, I would say those are the two things that are like really standing out now
Okay.
for the population I work with the most, which are now I've transitioned to working with more so like young adults and
Hmm.
not extremely young adults. We could say maybe my idea of what a middle-aged adult is from like because we don't live not everyone lives to 100, so I don't look at
Sure.
like
Sure.
50 as middle-aged, you
Sure.
know.
Sure.
I look at like maybe 25 to 50. I don't know, the quarter to middle life, let's put it that
Sure.
way.
Sure.
I work with a lot of quarter life individuals who took a jump into this adult world, and
Hmm.
I think a lot of them, a lot of my clients that I'm working with specifically are dealing with anxiety, low self-esteem, people from our
Hmm.
community, imposter syndrome, trying
Big.
to assimilate to like maybe their corporate job or
Hmm.
living in this either corporate world or the world that social media portrays,
Yes.
trying to figure out where and how they can perfectly keyword perfectly fit in, and that causes a lot of distress. So I find a lot of people between the ages of like 25 to 35 dealing with a lot of anxiety, feeling burnt out, trying to juggle everything,
Yeah.
missing missing out on self-care, maybe not truly understanding what it is and doubling down on things that aren't really serving them.
Yeah.
um, it's a lot, man. That's a deep question that I could just go on and on about.
It's
But
okay.
for black parents, I see a lot of anger, a lot of rage. Um, for black youth, I see a lot of just trying to navigate emotions. There's
Hmm.
so much variety going on. I can't think of like specific ones.
Okay.
Navigate all the emotions. Find language for the emotions. You
That's a
know,
big one.
yeah, because not everything is weird, and
No.
not every answer is I don't know. Let's explore.
No, we don't do I don't know.
Yeah, I'd
I,
say the same thing. We don't
I don't
do
know
that.
doesn't work. We can't do anything with that.
I don't know. I always like to look at it like I don't know means we haven't given it enough thought yet.
Mhm.
Or maybe we're simply throwing that in there, that phrase in there because we don't want to give it further thought.
Yes.
So
A lot of filler.
yes, it's
Kind of like,
like,
let's stop right there. I don't know. Let's move on.
but I don't know means I asked the right question.
Yeah.
Let's now come to an understanding.
Mm-hmm. Now
So
you gotta go deeper.
yeah, with teens, I hear a lot of that. I don't know.
Of course, of course. I feel like that's the most common phrase with youth.
Mhm.
Um, I would add to there real quick,
Yeah,
just that I think that for a lot of them as well, it's like you said. I feel like it's a lot of lack of emotional language to
there
be
we
able to
go.
verbalize and identify
Hmm.
what they're feeling.
Hmm.
I have a couple young brothers on my caseload right now, and that's what we're working on. Is like literally learning the words to be in
Hmm.
like sort of the emotional jargon
Yeah.
to be able to express how they're feeling, because the words they have right now, they're kind of talking around the thing instead of being
Hmm.
able to pinpoint this is what it is. I have a fear of abandonment. That's why
Ooh.
I'm anxious. That's why I'm afraid to open up and be vulnerable with this girl that I like, or with my
Mhm.
mom, or with my dad, because I'm afraid they're not going to be there, or when I open up, they're going to run away and laugh at me.
Yeah.
So trying to learn how to be able to pinpoint what those things are, can be challenging, but I do think it's important to learn so that
Yep.
way we can have, as you've mentioned before, healthy relationships with people, because then we can express ourselves more openly and clearly.
Yeah. Yeah,
So I
man.
definitely with
Man, you got my brain just like working right now. It's like
that.
so much I've seen and got a pleasure to work with the youth as well as adults as well as parents as well as you know the elderly.
Yeah, man. Even to your point about what you see, because obviously the demographics look a bit different because it depends on who's coming to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say for me, to answer my own question, with youth, it is what I said, a lot of sort of psychoeducation, helping them learn a lot of the language to be
Mm-hmm.
able to better express and articulate themselves.
Yeah.
And again, making it comfortable for men to talk to men, men to talk to women.
Mm-hmm.
Again, putting the machismo and the bravado to the side.
Yeah.
But also, I didn't touch on this yet, but when you mentioned moms, you made me think about this. I've gotten a lot of moms, particularly either single moms or moms who are separated from the father,
Right.
and not necessarily recognizing fully the effect that not having dad in the home, or not prioritizing the relationship between dad and their son, particularly the sons,
Right.
what that does to them. So
Ooh.
I've had to do a
Ooh.
lot of confrontation in the past of recognizing, and me being a father, of course, I will say I'm a little biased, but to recognize and say, not that fathers are more important than mothers. This is not a competition, but it's to say we should not be giving the impression that fathers are simply expendable,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't absolutely need them there. They're not mission critical to the successful and healthy development of a young man or a young woman. You
Mm-hmm.
need both. And
Absolutely.
I will say, in full transparency, I've only heard mothers say that. I've never heard a father tell me, I don't need my son's mom. I don't need my daughter. I've never heard that, because I think that we have an inherent appreciation for the mother, regardless of what our personal relationship might have been.
Right.
But I have heard from mothers that, he's just too difficult to deal with, or he's not willing to try. And I can appreciate where they're coming from, right? That maybe there's a certain level of hostility and tension because of our personal relationship that makes it difficult for us to navigate co-parenting.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I make the point, we have to find a way,
Yeah.
because if we don't, the youth, the child, they will pay the price,
Mm.
and it's not fair, and we got to do better. So I do a lot of confrontation when that comes up and say, listen, I don't want you to ever think it's okay or appropriate to minimize or diminish the role and the impact of this young man having a relationship with his father. It needs to
Mhm.
be paramount. It needs to be mission critical, just like it is for you.
Right.
So that's one of those areas that I don't know if it gets talked about a lot, but I want to bring it up simply because I want families to, if we can't stay together, to work better together, to collaborate and compromise, because it truly is a team effort. You know that expression, it takes a village.
Mhm.
You need all parties involved.
You do. You seriously do. I also see the direct correlation between specifically young boys, and I would say not even to say young boys. I think young children in general. The direct correlation between their behaviors
Hmm.
when they get to either a certain age and they're more mindful of like dad's not in my life,
Yeah.
or the correlation between dad recently quote unquote walking out of their life
Hmm.
and how their behaviors are reflective in that time period.
Yes.
So again, they may not have the words and the language to articulate that as
Mhm.
children. Um, and shout out to the moms because they don't think of it that way. You know, they
Yeah.
just don't want to deal with whatever drama or issues that comes with.
Yeah.
They just don't know. If you know better, you do better. But
I,
what's
I
what's
like
the
to believe that.
what's the quote when you don't know better? It's like we need to come up with a quote for
Yeah.
that.
We need a quotable. You know, it's true. No,
Yeah, when we
you're
don't
100%
know better, I don't believe in like really, and not that you're doing this, but I have to remind myself to be empathetic because I see
right.
it
Oh yeah.
too. And I'm like, when I see somebody do something potentially detrimental, whether it's to themselves, to their children, to someone else,
Hmm.
I I first go into empathy mode and I'm like, okay, they clearly are not doing it intentionally.
Right.
If they knew better, hopefully they would do better.
Yeah.
And because they don't know better, I got to give them some grace. But what you're doing is so very important, a healthy level of confrontation
Right.
to help plant that seed, spark
Correct.
that awareness. So
Correct.
now that they know better,
What are you gonna do?
it's on you now.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm big on providing that awareness and that insight.
Mhm.
And again, that's why I said I put my bias out there because I'm a father and I've learned to
Yes.
co-parent. So I'm not going to
Mhm.
make it sound like I'm not a little more favorable to the men
Mhm.
in terms of making sure that we feel equally respected in the role of raising a child.
Sure.
But of course, and you're 100% right. To me, you always try to reach and react with
Mhm.
empathy and grace because you don't know their situation, right? So I'm always trying to listen
Man,
first. Like,
man.
how do we get here? Not just simply, oh, I don't deal with his dad. Like, I want to understand. Like,
Mhm.
help me to understand how we got here.
Yep.
And then because I want to provide insight just to say, as a man, as a
Mhm.
father, because you might not have that relationship with your ex.
Mhm.
I want you to appreciate him. I want him to appreciate you because we need to do this together. I don't care what our personal relationship was. In my humble opinion, once we have children, that personal relationship goes right out the window. I don't care what
Mhm.
happened in the past.
Good
We have
point.
to find a way to make
Yeah.
it work because we chose to make these children. They
Good
didn't
point.
choose to be born. So we got
Absolutely.
to find a way. I don't care how difficult it was.
Mhm.
We made them.
Yep.
So they deserve the best. Every child,
Yep.
they deserve the best. Now, emphasize this more in talking about our communities because our community is largely made up of single mothers with fathers not being as present. Like, I'm not going to gloss over that fact
Yeah.
because that to me is a huge contributing factor to exactly what you were referencing earlier about why we see a lot of young men in DJJ, in
Yeah.
the court systems, because they don't have that fatherly presence in their
Mhm.
life consistently.
Mhm.
That to me is the only difference between me and some of my peers in the hood that I grew up in back home.
Mhm.
As strict as my dad was and as emotionally unavailable as he may have been, he did have a firm presence every day that
Mhm.
kept me out of the street.
I
And
think
I
about
will
that every
definitely
day.
give him credit for that
Yeah.
because he did. And a lot of
Listen.
young brothers, they don't have that.
Yeah. If my dad was not in the home, and I'm aware of this because there were times where my dad would leave for like a week, maybe two, at most three,
Mm,
just going back to Jamaica, and he had like some business to handle down there, and I'll
yeah.
be left at home with my mom, the nurturer and the caring, loving, not as disciplinarian. I
Yeah.
used to think to myself, as young as I was, like, whoa, if my dad like was never here, I would be like doing what I want.
Right.
I would be running my own little show.
Yeah.
And I would make a lot of foolish decisions and foolish mistakes, not knowing any better.
Yeah.
So, for one, shout out to my dad. Shout out to all the dads who are playing a present role in their children's lives.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But also, too, shout out to the moms. Shout out to the
Absolutely.
single moms who actually want their children's dad in their
Yes.
children's lives, but for
Yes.
whatever the circumstance is, it's not an option. Whether
Yeah.
it's they're not alive, whether it's
Incarcerated.
incarcerated, whatever the case may be, I meet a lot of those. I meet a lot of, and there's just some dads who
Who
maybe
don't
it's
want to
too
be
much
there. No,
effort.
no.
Yeah, too much
Yes.
effort to play a
Absolutely.
role. So
Absolutely.
shout out to those moms. And this is a strange dynamic I see. And again, kudos to these moms that have to play the role of both mom and dad.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them do it pretty darn good.
Yeah.
I think all of them, they're doing their best. So all of them do it pretty darn good.
Yeah.
But what you're saying has plenty of weight to it, like having that male figure, that positive male figure. And
Mm-hmm.
I can attest to it, seeing it and living it. I can attest to it seeing it though. I have a select few clients that are very young
Yeah.
whose parents are co-parenting or together very well. And man, these kids, you can tell. You got to think, what is like special in a positive way about this kid?
Mm-hmm.
This kid has their dad in their life and their mom in their life. And they're looking at dad like Superman and they're looking at mom like Superwoman. And
Yeah.
they love and appreciate, and they're co-parenting in such a healthy way. They don't
Yeah.
see any hatred or
Yes.
any maliciousness or any spitefulness or any negative conversations between the two,
Mm-hmm.
mom and dad. And
Agreed, man.
man,
It's very true.
everybody has their nuanced situations. I gotta say kudos to the moms too,
Yeah.
who decided to leave a situation because maybe having the two parents together might not have been the best thing.
Oh
Whether
no,
it's
agree.
whether it's abuse in there, or whether it's, and this word could be overused sometimes, but toxicity.
Yes.
Um, so everyone's situation is so nuanced, but like you say, like it is so important. You've lived it, and you are now in the father role,
Yes, I'm on the other side.
so you've seen both sides.
Yes, which is also why I'm so impassioned about it, and then I get the moms that come to me too. And I agree, again, that to me, that's why we start with listening and being patient, because
Mhm.
I'm the last person to judge somebody's situation and say what I
Yeah,
think it should be. What
yeah,
I simply try to point out, if you have two figures, meaning
yeah.
parents that want to be involved,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes they allow their emotional past,
Mm.
as when they were romantically involved, cloud their judgment in terms of
Ooh,
them healthily functioning to work together and collaborate as a team to raise
mm-hmm.
their child. I don't
Right.
support that. I will
Yeah.
confront that every time, because to me, that is an inappropriate way of being selfish, to say,
Mm.
I don't want to deal with this, but this is the part that we fail to realize. But you chose to make this young person. We don't have the right anymore to
Mm-hmm.
say, I don't want to deal with this person, because
Right.
you went with that person to make this young person.
Yep.
So I cannot, in good conscience, say, if it's unhealthy, don't work with them. No, to your point, if we don't need to be together because it is unhealthy for us trying to live together and maintain a romantic relationship while also trying to parent, fair. If you tried therapy and you did your work and you realize we don't want to work on it, I'll take that. I'm not necessarily judging that part. What I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying is, when you take that and put that to the side now, what is the rationale to not work
Mm-hmm.
together with that other parent? Because you are impacting your child in such a harmful way that you're not even aware of yet. because they're
Yeah.
not going to manifest it for many, many years until they get older. And they
Mm-hmm.
might see somebody like you when you worked in the facility.
Mm.
You see what I mean?
I see what you're saying. That confrontation is necessary.
Yeah. So that's where that comes from for me. But I'm very sensitive to all parties involved and what their circumstances are. I never think
Of
it's
course.
one side over another.
Of
But
course. Of
I want us
course.
to appreciate the gravity of what we're talking about. When we're talking
Yeah.
about a young person, I
Yeah.
want us to grow up well adjusted. And as you
Yeah.
said, what's the difference between some of those kids? It's not because one kid's more special. Some of them
Yeah.
are just in a more grounded and stable environment because they
Yeah.
have a loving, supportive family, regardless of whether they are romantically together or not. They
Mm-hmm.
recognize the importance of showing that unified front to their child.
I agree,
So
man.
let me get off my soapbox now with that one.
No, that's good to be on it.
But that's things that I see sometimes with, when it comes to some of the moms or even dads who have brought some young clients to me. So we have to have that conversation to give them perspective and hopefully insight to plant that seed.
Yeah.
So my last question, man, and again, this has been such a riveting conversation.
Yeah.
Talking a little bit more about what some of the future is that you have in the field for yourself, or maybe future goals or aspirations.
So, the most present one is I am still new to the private practice space, and I'm just like fully immersed in that space, getting
Yeah.
to know this specific demographic that I'm working with on an individual basis, because I understand the issues on a macro,
Mm,
but getting to know everyone's individual experience and presenting problem and helping them through that. So just making sure everyone is getting like quality care. That's so important to me. I think that's something I will advocate for, like going forward, like making sure specifically everyone, of course, but specifically people from our community get quality care.
mm-hmm,
Because one thing that grinds my gears is when I ask someone, have they been to therapy before? And they
mm-hmm.
tell me, yeah. And then they tell me their experience was a negative one.
Yeah.
And we can link it back to the therapist did not provide them with quality care.
Right.
And we could link it all the way back to self care. The
Mm-hmm.
therapist was not engaging in appropriate self care to
Correct.
first fill up their tank, fill up their cup, to pour adequately into who they're working with.
Mm-hmm.
So my goal right now is to make sure that my clients are receiving like quality care. And I do that partially by making sure I take care of myself.
Excellent.
Yes, yes,
That's what I want to
yes.
hear.
And to go out a little further, a goal for mine definitely by the end of 2023 is to have my private practice like operating smoothly. I'm still in the beginning stages, so there's a lot of paperwork, nitpicky stuff that I've done and
Sure.
took a lot of work to do, and a lot of marketing stuff that I've done and took a lot to do. And
Yeah.
now just like making sure people know I'm out there, you know?
Yes, sir.
So I'm just creating space for that. Then from there, it's like, man, my brain just gets to turning so many ideas. But mostly like, how can we make a bigger impact? We can only work,
There you
we can
go.
work with a finite amount of people individually. And this is
Correct.
why I love what you're doing. Millions of people can listen to this. In your lifetime, unfortunately, RJ, you may not work with a million people.
I highly doubt that I'll be fortunate enough to do that.
And that might not even be a fortune. That means like you would
Yeah.
have burnt yourself out to
Oh
like
yeah. Yeah.
nothingness.
There's a
Um,
cost.
yes. But what you will do, hopefully, is be impacting people long after you're gone,
Hmm.
impacting our communities in positive ways. That's what's important to me as well. So I've got some books I want to release that they're already written up, and
Okay.
and they're on mental health and they're specific to our people.
Great.
But right now, what is priority is my clients. And when I have more space in the private practice, it is, making space to finalize those books and put them out there, and
Great.
hopefully, um, whether it's audio or visual form, that can impact someone
Absolutely.
from our community. And from there, like the world is wide open. Our community is, as therapists, we impact our community much bigger than this space. Like, things I have in mind for future is like more of the products I use. I want them to be more from Black owned businesses.
Heard.
We talked previously about making sure that in this space, as a private practitioner, you are a business owner,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't do this all on your own. You
No.
need to outsource and delegate and collaborate in certain ways.
Yes, sir.
My goal is to make that within the BIPOC community.
Same.
And that is where my mind is at. How can I impact and continue to give back on bigger than like an hourly way? Because I could see my clients hourly,
Mm-hmm.
but I want, if I need something, I want to make the time and space to look and see if a Black person has created it. Let me shop with them. If I'm going to do some passion, some hobby of some sort, for me right now it's writing. Make sure that it's tailored to have an impact on the people of my community in a positive way.
Yeah.
um, and so much more. And even our community is like from family. I have a lot of goals and ambitions for my immediate family, and then branching it out to extended family, and then
Mm-hmm.
branching it out to the community, and then further onwards. So
Yeah, man.
my brain is too all over the place to like give you a structured answer, man.
No, listen, everything you said. We want to hear, man. When the book comes
Yeah.
out, we want to purchase it. So
Oh
make
yeah,
make sure you come back so we can get that out there so folks can know that it's there. But
absolutely.
no, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think that in terms of the future,
Mhm,
there is a lot of opportunity for those of us that are in this space. And
mhm,
as you talked about, again, impact is always really important to me, and purpose.
mhm.
And that's obviously a big reason why we're here. And
Yeah,
that's why I wanted to talk to people like you and others, but
yeah,
particularly people like you, because again, I want people to know that we exist
for
and
sure.
that these professions are ones that not only are in need in terms of the community and help with healing, but that you can do pretty well for yourself and you can
Mhm,
provide quality service while also being able to take care of your family and more importantly, to also take care of yourself. Again,
mhm.
self care, as you mentioned.
Number
And
one.
to me, that's so important, man. I want us to be able to lead that charge and make it feel more normalized that we can not only engage in this type of work but make it comfortable for folks. And I'm
Yeah.
hoping that these conversations and having this type of content out there will make that feel relatively normalized, so that way if somebody else wants to start a podcast or they want to do a video series or they want to write books, other things that we can do other than our direct client care, I
Yeah.
think it's going to be necessary because, as you said,
Vital.
and I'm very much in agreement with that. I
Mhm,
can only work with one person at a time, and I'm not going to sacrifice my mental health in pursuit of trying to help more people because I'm not going to be a good steward of the
mhm.
profession, as
Yeah.
you were mentioning earlier. I want to be a good representative of what therapy can be. And I wanted to touch on something that you said a moment ago. A lot of my clients are first time in therapy clients
I love those
because a lot
clients.
because a lot of them are, from the community, so they've never had the encouragement to want to seek out services.
Mhm,
And I'm always very intentional and I try to do things very slow and very methodical because I want them to have a favorable experience. Not necessarily that it's going to be great because they might be unpacking a lot of difficult stuff. So they might not quote unquote rate it as it was a great experience, but it was good. It was helpful. It was necessary.
right.
But what I hope is that they have a favorable experience because I tell
Mhm,
them we're not going to tackle everything that you might have going on. I learned that
mhm,
from one of my professors in grad school. Sometimes there's
mhm,
different seasons for different therapists. This therapist might help you get to this point and then you
mhm,
stop. And then you might come a year more later and then you might work with this therapist and take it a little further and so
mhm,
on. I want to leave you with sort of a good taste in your mouth, if you will, and be
mhm.
encouraged. that I had a favorable experience. I felt like it was helpful and it was productive. So I'm encouraged to go back when I need help again. And as you
Mm,
were pointing out, if I don't do that from the therapist standpoint, they might not. And that would be
yeah.
very harmful, in my opinion. It would be like almost a doctor almost doing like malpractice with a patient, and then they don't want to go back even though they're having heart palpitations or they're having trouble breathing, like very real symptoms that they need to be concerned about, but they're like, nah, because I had this one really terrible experience with my last doctor, so I'm not going to go
Yeah.
back. I don't want
Yeah.
us to encourage that. So I want
Nope.
us to be very thoughtful when we're working with first timers, as many
Hmm.
of us were,
Yes,
and help them feel encouraged about the work that they're doing so that if they're in need in the future that they will come back.
I agree.
So either way, man, great conversation. Like I love when I get to again talk with therapists, especially ones like us, because
Yeah.
this is not an often thing that I get to do. I hope it
Mhm.
slowly does become more. But
Yeah.
I,
Let me know. I've been on like a networking spree. I'll
yeah,
ask. And I've been specifically on a networking spree with other Black therapists because our
okay.
community is small and
Yes,
connection is
very small.
important. So
Absolutely.
I'll
Absolutely.
reach out to some to see if they'll be interested. If you're interested in like
Of course.
interviewing more of us.
Of course, man. I want us to, as you said, as like a network, I want people to know
Mhm.
that we exist, and it
Yep.
helps to see it. Like I'm very visual.
Yeah.
So I want people to be able to see it, and
Mhm.
just the type of conversations we're having, because I think that the more we talk about these things, particularly in a public forum as we are now, it
Yeah.
helps to normalize the conversation. So people don't have to feel as nervous to say, oh, for example, even therapists have their own issues.
Oh man, of
They have
course.
their own challenges that they have to navigate. And I'm very transparent with my clients. Like I'll tell them, I've overcome this, I've had to work on this. These are some of the hardships, because I feel that it helps to build rapport and show that I am not like impervious to to
Mhm.
trauma and challenge. Like I've gone through a lot of similar things that maybe you have.
Mhm.
And I feel like it humanizes us. And
Mhm.
so I like that we can have these conversations and people can see the other side, kind of peek behind the curtain.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping that again, it also encourages people to want to reach out if they wanted to. So maybe, maybe you'll get some calls
Yeah.
after somebody watches this or reads this, or maybe, you'll point them in the direction if you can't work with them to go talk to somebody. And so that's the ultimate point of this, and
Mhm.
to, to start that conversation. So I really, really appreciate you being here. And I hope that if there's an opportunity, of course, to collaborate in the future, that we can absolutely
Absolutely.
make that happen.
Absolutely, man. I've been honored to join you today, and it's a privilege. And like you're saying, so like anyone who's listening, we are here, and representation does matter. So no matter how specific you want to get in your representation, like I said, I've been networking. If you want to work with a Black male therapist, we're here. You can look
Yeah.
us up. You can reach out to us. We're here. If we're full and we can't accept any more clients, we'll connect you. Like I take it personal,
Hmm.
connecting like people who reach out to a good clinician. Because
Yeah.
let me be honest, there's a lot of burnt out clinicians that don't therapists who don't take care of themselves.
Right.
And I think twice about referring to them if they're not aware of what's going on and the patterns they're following.
Correct.
So if you need or want to explore getting into therapy and you feel like you need a Black woman to work with, reach out to me. Reach out to RJ. Like we'll get you connected.
Yes.
If you need a couples counselor, reach out to us. We'll get you connected.
Hmm.
Well, they're like everyone is out here, so everyone can be represented. You know,
Yes. Yes.
it's
100%, man.
important. It's important.
Yes. That's what we want to see.
Mhm.
And I think that the more that we have these conversations, the more that we get to know other brothers and sisters in the field,
Yeah.
we get to grow that network, right? And
Hmm.
expand, even maybe across state lines. And
Yeah.
and I think that that's important. And I think that it will create more equity for our community, because then there'll be more representation of individuals that you can reach out to
Mhm.
start getting services with. And to me, that's really where I want to gear everybody to, is if you know that there's some things that you needed to deal with, like, let's get started.
Yeah.
What's the barriers? What's prohibiting you from getting started? And so maybe listening or watching conversations like this might help you be that first step, that you had some barrier in your mind that was like, no, I don't think I'm supposed
Mhm.
to do that. No, we don't do that. Conversations like that, we don't engage in that kind
Mhm.
of stuff. No, we do, we can, and we are here. So please use us for as long as we are here, because
Yeah.
your mental, physical, and emotional health, to me, is paramount, to try to get as much balance as
Yeah.
we can in those different domains. So
Mhm.
talking to people like us and anybody else that's out there that wants to service the community, we want to support and encourage that. So I hope
Absolutely.
that there's been some value that has been gained from this conversation, because I certainly have, from talking to you. So again, thank you for being
Same
here,
here.
and
My pleasure.
maybe we'll get to catch up again in a future episode.
Hopefully soon. Yeah.